City Council informational meeting. Today's appreciate everyone's attendance. We do have a rather full agenda for this afternoon. And before we begin, I'm going to let you know we're going to move one thing. I'm going to move Jim David's staff report to be the last thing on the agenda. So sorry, Jim, but thank you. That was his suggestion, so by the way. So we will begin calling our meeting to order, and our audit committee. We had an audit committee meeting last week. Councilor Rolfing.
Yes, thank you very much. We did. We had an audit committee and a very productive one. We had a number of things that we went over. First one was the annual audit. We had a report from Ide Bailey on the annual audit of the City of Sioux Falls, and that's going along very well. In fact, it's done. The CAFR should be ready sometime very soon. We had an unqualified opinion on it, which is the highest opinion that they can offer, and so things are very very good bookkeeping wise, if you will, and money wise with the city. We also got an audit report on the public facilities ticket fees. Some of you know there are some fees that are part of all the tickets that are sold at the venues around town. And we completed a review, the audit committee did, and had some opinions on how they should improve that situation, and that will be brought to us in an informational on the 5th, next or 2 weeks from now. And so we'll have a chance to review that. You'll have a chance to take a look at it and see what that was. And we may have to make some policy changes if we want, and we can do that, begin the process with the public service or fiscal committee at that point, if needed. And then lastly, we had an audit recommendation or audit of the audit of the recommendations that have been made over the past few years, which I think is very, very important. Rich does an excellent job of keeping track of the recommendations that have been made over the last couple, 3 years and following up on them to make sure that they've been implemented. As I said at that time, if you don't inspect what you expect, it doesn't usually happen. And so that was done. I want to go back to the internal audit or the external audit with Ide Bailey. They should be presenting something on the 5th also of May for us to take a look at. So very productive meeting. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions for the counselor? All righty. Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. And then Public Services Committee also had a meeting last Tuesday. Councilor Erickson.
Yes, we had Jessica, the Sustainability Coordinator, provide an overview of home and business recycling requirements. This was just very informative and just talked about really our duties as a citizen, as recycling and the businesses as well, and what's required in ordinance. There were some proposed next steps, and so Public Services will be working with her in making sure that those steps come back to Public Services and if any other changes need to take place. But some of it just comes down to enforcing what's already in code. That's it.
All righty. Questions on recycling? Public Services Committee. Thank you, Councilor Erickson. We'll now go into our City Council open discussion, and we do have one guest here today, Councilor Anderson.
Since the city has put out a new product website in conjunction with our workforce development project, I've asked Darren Smith to come here and give us a little presentation about the website.
Welcome, Darren.
Hey, good afternoon. Darren Smith, Director of Community Development for the City of Sioux Falls. Councilor Anderson, well, first, thank you for the invitation, and we have two guests, myself and Heather. I'd like her to talk about the more technical nature of the website. In some respects, she's better with that than I am, quite honestly. Also, I did mention to Councilor Anderson Jr. that I did have a previous commitment at 4 o'clock to make a presentation downtown today, so I moved that back to 4:30. But out of respect for those folks, I do need to make a presentation at 4:30. So you've got a full agenda. You've mentioned that. We'll be as brief as we can. We have a contract for the website on the consent agenda tonight, and so Heather and I will both be back and continue the dialogue or answer more questions. But Well, just very briefly, again, thinking about how we want to summarize the effort and the impetus for it and so forth, and then how it works. I would start with this, and a couple things I think you folks already know. We have had consistently low unemployment rates. Unemployment rate in the Sioux Falls area has ranged anywhere from 2.5% to 3.5% for what feels like a long time now. It's also fair to say we have had well over 2,000 available jobs in Sioux Falls, again, for what feels like a very long time. I think we've been somewhere between 2,200 and 2,600 available jobs in Sioux Falls for the last couple years or even few years. Again, you already know these things. I think in large part, that's one of the reasons, or some of the reasons, you took the initiative yourselves late last year to step up and amend the budget, the 2015 budget, to create what became known as a workforce development pilot program, $500,000 to tackle workforce development issues. And I remember one of the things I think said that night and said again recently is to take the initiative, provide the leadership to do something to begin addressing workforce development in our community in a way that was not being done before. Very specifically, the topic of a one-stop shop website for all jobs in Sioux Falls, or all available jobs, honestly has been coming up off and on for some time. Lots of cities, both in South Dakota and across the country, have jobs websites. This certainly is not a new concept. We can't take credit for coming up with a unique idea here. Lots of cities have sites. We certainly looked at those, and it's come up from time to time why Sioux Falls doesn't have a site. It has come up in conversations and meetings that we've had internally and externally for some time. In an effort to build the workforce development pilot program, I know you've heard me say this a number of times, we met with at least 20 different workforce, what I would consider workforce stakeholders in the community last year, largely the last half of October, all through November, maybe the first few days in December, to try and get our arms around what are the issues in the community, how do we shape this pilot program going forward. But one of the other things that came out of that was, again, this topic of helping businesses fill jobs, helping workers find these jobs, and the topic of a website. It came up more than once by different groups. Why doesn't Sioux Falls have a website that captures these jobs to make it easy for people to help businesses and so forth? And for us, to me, that feels like that was the moment. Maybe, again, it wasn't new, but the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, for us to say, you know what, this is something that we hear it all the time. It's something we need to do. We need to charge forward with. In my opinion, it was a clear opportunity. We knew it would be very well received and also utilized by many, and it has been. And it's been 3 weeks, but very honestly, it's in my 5 years working here full time, and maybe I could say this about my 6 years on the city council too. It's on a very, very short list of efforts and projects I've been a part of where the positive feedback and the negative feedback is running almost 100 to 0. It really is in terms of the feedback we've received. So Heather and I started brainstorming on how we could accomplish this, how we could move forward. We identified a web developer in Electric Pulp that we were excited to work with. They were excited to be a part of what they saw as a larger community effort. We wanted to focus obviously on jobs, but what we also realized along the way is if you do much research or read about how are people, especially younger generations, the millennials we hear about, how are they making decisions on taking jobs, starting careers, and so forth, one of the things you'll see again consistently is where they live is important, the quality of life in the community. So this was always about a jobs website, as Heather calls it, a discovery site for available jobs. But it also had to be, at least in part, about selling the community promotion. And in many cases, for people who don't live here or have never been here, it's an introduction to the city. It's an introduction to Sioux Falls. So you'll see on the website the first time you go there, there's a landing page we created, which it'll say things like #1 place to live, #1 place to retire, #1 place for small business, et cetera, et cetera. So we get a small pitch for Sioux Falls and the community, and then it fades away and it goes to the meat and potatoes, which is the available jobs. You know, once we had a website to be the centerpiece and then we wanted to promote it, why billboards, why airport advertising, why the kiosks for the event center, maybe eventually the Empire Mall, things like that. Why? Well, we felt like that was the best bang for the buck in terms of exposure. Those things I listed, and again, you know, we announced where we're promoting the site right now with 3 billboards on 2 interstates, throughout the airport, in the event center lobby, and it moves around there too, and will be in other places hopefully going forward. Just those places represents about 2 million impressions annually as far as number of times somebody will see those billboards, those kiosks, the airport, and so forth. So very simply, that's why we chose that. As far as reaching those not from here, well, that's what the website is for, and that's what the internet, the World Wide Web, is for. Search engine optimization, those types of things that we want to do going forward. I'm going to have Heather come up now and talk a little bit about how the site actually works, how it collects the jobs, shows them. Also talk about the Google Analytics, the data, which I think you'll find very intriguing. And then we'll wrap it up with a couple things and answer questions.
Thank you, Darren. Welcome, Heather.
Good afternoon, counselors. I am Heather Hitterdall. I'm the communications specialist for the City of Sioux Falls. And it's an exciting project to come and talk to you about tonight. We do feel it is the most comprehensive jobs website in our community, which is a really big accomplishment. It's easy to navigate. If you've been there, you know it's beautiful and it's easy to navigate. It's also mobile friendly, which means if you look at it on your iPhone or a tablet or your laptop, it should work very well. And as Darren said, it was designed as a discovery site. So it's kind of the kayak of jobs for job seekers in Sioux Falls, and it compiles those job listings through Indeed.com. So we do have a partner account with Indeed.com for those jobs to be funneled onto our site, and if you go, you'll look and you'll see advertising for all sorts of jobs. It's awesome. It talks about CEOs and nurses and nannies and any variety of job you should be able to find through this site. Indeed pulls job listings from many different sources, including some paid recruitment sites that have agreements with Indeed. There is not a way right now for a business to post a job directly to the site. We did not want to compete with the paid recruitment sites already in Sioux Falls. That was not the goal of this site. It was just to see those job listings all together on one site. So there is not a way for a business to post jobs directly to the site. We are asking businesses to continue advertising their job listings in the ways that they've been doing it in the past on their own websites, on paid recruitment sites, and there's a pretty good chance that our site should find those listings. It's probably not going to be a 100% for every job that's listed in Sioux Falls, but it's pretty close. So since we rolled this new website out on April 2nd, the response has been very, very positive. We've had businesses reaching out to us probably every day, excited about the site, grateful that the city is doing something to help fill this need, and wondering how they can post their positions on the site. And they've all been very understanding when I tell them, oh, you can't post your positions directly to the site. Some of them are actually relieved that they don't have to post their positions to yet another website in Sioux Falls, but that they should appear there anyway. They're actually pretty happy about that. And just to give you a few numbers, the site has seen some pretty heavy traffic flow in these 2.5 to 3 weeks as well. According to Google Analytics, we've had nearly 17,000 sessions. So what a session is a period of time when any user is actively engaged in the website. So about 17,000 times someone has been sitting at their computer or they're on their iPhone looking at this website. Out of those, about 13,000 are considered users. So that means about 1/4 of people have come back more than once, and about 3/4 have used it one time. And in that process, the site has had more than 50,000 page views. So what that means is when they come, they're clicking through, they're looking at actual jobs. So we see about 3 pages per session that people are actually using the website, and people are on the site for more than 3 minutes. So that really does tell me that they are sitting there, they're using the site. It's also interesting to see where these people are coming from. And Google Analytics isn't perfect, but it does give us a good idea of who these people are. Less than half the traffic is actually from here in Sioux Falls. The other top cities are Minneapolis, St. Paul, Louisville, Kentucky, and we're not really sure why that is. We're kind of looking into that because that's an interesting statistic for us. And the third is Chicago. And believe it or not, there are people in other countries looking at our website. The numbers are small, but 87 sessions from the United Kingdom. We've got people from Brazil, Canada. That is the power of having the World Wide Web. It is worldwide, and anyone can get to it. So again, the response has been really positive, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Darren for some closing remarks.
Heather, thank you. I just wanted a couple things briefly, and there's a lot more I know to talk about, but you know, at the end of the day, when we set out to do this, we were really trying to accomplish two things. Two things, keeping it very simple. Help businesses fill jobs. That's something we've continued to hear about for some time. Help businesses fill jobs, be more productive, be more profitable, strengthen the local economy. The second was to help people looking for jobs find these jobs. That kept coming up again and again and was a bit of a surprise, frankly, for me more than the businesses. I've known what their needs have been. We've heard about that for some time, but we heard it quite a bit from nonprofits and others who help people find jobs. That why can't there just be one website that shows all these jobs and makes it easy for people? So that's very simply, that's what we set out to do. And I think we've done that. Lastly, and I think this is a compliment, other cities are now reaching out asking if they can do a jobs website just like we've done. And so again, I think it's a compliment to the site. I think it's a very high quality site. It's effective so far, but again, it's just, you know, it's the beginning. It's in the initial stages. That's all we had. If there are questions, we'd be happy to.
Thank you, Darren. Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, Darren, tonight we have the Pope Electric contract on the consent calendar for $39,000. How long is that contract for?
Just real quick, it's one of the up to do not exceeds, because what that contract does, well, let me answer the question and then add on to it just a little bit. That contract, because it's operating dollars, general fund dollars, it would be just for this year, it'd be for the remainder of the year, the calendar year, fiscal year. And what it does really is it establishes different fees and rates. So a monthly hosting fee, search optimization fees, that's to make it effective on the web, make sure it's found, those types of things with results. It establishes rates for maintenance, enhancements, technical support, those types of things.
So just for the remainder of this
calendar year, or fiscal year, they're one and the same.
Okay,
yes.
December 31st.
Correct.
39,000, okay.
Yeah, and honestly, and again, we do the up to provide some flexibility. Honestly, what we expect, assuming there's no surprises or things along the way, and we've already had one surprise, as I think you guys know, I would expect us to land somewhere probably closer to that 30 to 35,000 going forward. So the other is just to make sure we don't exceed it before the end of the year, and then we'd have to come back in. And that's very common with a lot of contracts that come over the up to or do not exceed.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Erickson.
I have a couple I'll just kind of fire off. Where do all the jobs pull from?
Yep. Well, I'm going to give you a short answer. Heather's better with this than I am, but in layman's terms, our site pulls jobs off of Indeed.com, which is this large national website where lots and lots and lots of jobs are found. And Indeed.com has agreements with other paid advertising sites, and in some cases corporate sites. So it has agreements to pull jobs from their sites, And then in other cases, it goes out and grabs jobs off of other sites with their permission, pulls it into theirs, and then we have an agreement with Indeed.com to go take their jobs. The reason sites, one of the first questions I had is, why would some sites give permission to another site to go do that? And my understanding is because, very simply, a lot of sites sell businesses and others on posting their jobs with them based on exposure, how many people see it, visit the site, and so forth. So the more people that visit the site, click on it, view it, and so forth, it drives up the numbers for all those sites.
So is it Shopping News, Kelloland, Argus Leader?
It would be, as I understand it, it would be anybody who has an agreement with Indeed.com.
Okay.
Which is very widespread. I think they, if not the largest, they are one of the 3 largest in the nation that do this. It's fair to say, I'm certain they don't have agreements with everybody, and so it's not every single job. And so we've been very careful to say, we'll never say it has 100% of the jobs in Sioux Falls, because we'll never know that. But we're fairly comfortable and confident in saying it has a very high percentage of the available jobs.
Okay, a couple more if I can continue. Does the $39,000 that's on our contract for the rest of the year, does that include the $24,000 that was already spent to them?
No. So $24,000 was essentially to create the site. Make it functional, get it ready to go live, flip the switch, now we have a site. Then again, what comes forward, and this is in the contract now going forward, again, the monthly hosting on their server, the technical support, if we have issues, I would say, we average, Heather can correct me, but I'm going to say we average maybe a couple calls a day. We've averaged a couple calls or emails a day from folks who have posted a job for their business on Indeed or somewhere, and they don't see it on our site, and they want to know why or how can we fix that. Sometimes, it'll be somebody calling saying, hey, your website isn't working on my computer. What's the deal? So that's the type of technical support that, you need going forward. The search engine optimization, again, at layperson's level, is to make sure we're found on Google and those types of places when they're searching for Sioux Falls jobs, employment, whatever, Sioux Falls work. They find our site, it comes up very high every time, that type of thing. Maintenance of the site, again, as you folks know, I think it was a week ago, give or take, or 2 weeks ago, when we had somebody having a little fun posting jobs that were coming through to our site, and it took less than, I think, 3 minutes, give or take, for that to be identified by the web developer, the host, and take it down and then put a filter in place to fix it. That's the type of stuff that they do. There will be things like that going forward. Enhancements. One thing I would definitely like to add that's fairly straightforward, a lot of sites similar to this have, is the ability to create a personal profile. That's not uncommon on sites like this. You can go out and give your name and tell it about what kind of jobs are you interested in, and then it'll email you or communicate with you however you ask it to when there's jobs available you might be interested in.
So since the contract hasn't been done, have they been doing it pro bono then, or does it go back to when they started? Because I'm assuming when all the interesting jobs were listed, that you probably saw somewhat of a spike in people going out and looking at it really fast because they thought it was funny, and I'm sure that day went off the charts during that time. Okay, so as a whole, what is the project going to cost? From January 1 to December 31st, what is the whole dollar amount? Billboards, kiosks, website, everything.
Well, I'd say, let's see, Lamar's about 18, 11, 29. Airport, 15, 44. The billboards, the kiosks, the airport, the advertising component is going to be about $44,000. And then the website itself, the 24, and again, I would say, we're going to land somewhere between 30 and 35 going forward. So maybe 55 to 60 on the website. So I'd say right around $100,000 is going to be very, very close.
And then Two more little ones, I'm sorry. What was done in advance? I mean, we've talked about the process of
Yep.
kind of the surprise of us not
Yep.
knowing what's going on.
Yep.
So how did you get to this?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, hey, let's do a website. This would be really great for our community.
Yeah.
What type of research? Was there any dollars spent in, is this really a need in our community? Is this something that we need to move forward with an unemployment rate of 3%? Do we need to be advertising in
Yeah.
our airport or in the Rapid City airport or the Minneapolis airport to get people to come into our tax base?
Yes. Well, again, it'd be a lot of what I said earlier. It's something that we've been hearing repeatedly for the last few years. The low unemployment rate, all the available jobs, helping businesses find people, helping people find jobs, and connecting. And what we've always said on this, not just workforce development, but these workforce challenges our community has, there isn't one silver bullet. There's going to be a lot of things that need to be done. There's a community planning effort taking place right now with Forward Sioux Falls to put a plan in place for all of us to utilize going forward. There's a website like this which helps specifically with recruitment and attraction. That was one thing, frankly, that with the pilot program was going to be a challenge. Providing dollars to businesses to somehow go out and do recruitment and attraction because of the public purpose smell test that has to be passed. So this was one way to tackle the recruitment and attraction effort. And again, lots and lots of cities have these sites. We looked at different ones. Mitchell has one. They have for a few years. Omaha, Minneapolis. So, other cities have utilized them. We felt it was something that was an opportunity to do and we think will be effective. And so now, we've launched it. We'll monitor and measure those Google Analytics along the way and look for ways to continue promoting it. So.
Councilor Erickson, Mr. Smith has an appointment at 4:30, and I know Councilor Erpenbach has a question. So, Councilor?
Thank you. Thanks for coming forward with this, Darren. I appreciate it. I just want to be crystal clear. Number one, the website's a great idea. We can continue to have conversations about the rest of it. You've just now said there's about $100,000 you're going to spend toward this entire project. Councilor Anderson started this conversation talking about the workforce development pilot project. Mm-hmm. Can you clarify for the citizens that are listening for us, how much of that $100,000 is coming out of that $500,000 that we said for workforce development?
Zero.
Okay.
Zero.
Two separate projects is what we're talking
two
about.
Separate, yeah. Yep. And again, as one of those things, sure, you can say they're related or closely related in terms of the topic. And we thought about that, but very honestly, again, the demand there was for that, I think we ended up around 39 applications for $2 million. And there was a lot of good proposals, felt like that's where we should focus. Again, is this related? Yes. And we knew the pilot program was going to ultimately end up being probably a little weak, frankly, in the recruitment and attraction category. That was one of the 4 identified last fall as businesses and nonprofits saying, this is where you should be focusing on. And we knew the pilot program was going to be a challenge. We'd probably come up short there. And so that was kind of in parallel with what we were hearing about a website and the ability to do that, and looking at what other cities have done and so forth, and doing our own research. So,
good. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Darren that you stick around. One question from Councilor Rolfing and one from Councilor Jamison, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Okay, Councilor Rolfing.
There we go. I'll make mine short. I did want to just emphasize again to you, Darren, as I've done in private, that we promote and we cooperate with the foundation and other people going forward on this to make sure that we don't double up on an effort. Just an idea, I've got more questions for Heather as we come along, but just an idea, because I think we've got a good opportunity, and I support what's happening here. But I'm thinking of, where do we target, where do we go? Yep. Have you considered cooperating with the CVB on their advertising that they do nationwide?
Short answer is yes. And we did meet with them before the launch. We invited Terry with CVB. She was gone that day. I don't remember what she was gone or ill or something. But yes, we made that clear. That's the next part of this, and they're very excited about it. And I think the balance will be one of the shortfalls with a lot of the other city sites or community sites is that they junk them up with links and paid advertising and those things. So we have been determined, and you see that, and we want to be determined going forward to keep it clean. But clearly there are some that make sense, no-brainers. And to me, I think things like the Chamber, CVB, Development Foundation, the state site, and so forth, and we talk to the state too, are no-brainers to do. And we don't want to ever do paid advertising. So,
Councilor Jameson.
Thank you. I, for one, do not think that this is a good idea for the city to be involved in competing with all the other job sites that are out there. But Darren, why isn't this website a part of our own SiouxFalls.org?
Well, I think for one, we wanted to make it a separate and distinct effort. Also provide maximum flexibility going forward with some of the things that Councilor Rolfing was talking about. So we've, backing up, we've from the beginning, we've thought about all of those things. What should it look like? What should it partner with as far as other sites, those types of things immediately and going forward. So yes, a lot of thought went into that, and we really felt like it should be a separate and distinct effort and site. Just maximum flexibility going forward that's really the best, cleanest, quickest answer I can give you on that. But we did give some thought to that, and we did talk about that.
Okay, I know there might be other questions for Heather. Councilor Rolfing, did you have a question for Heather?
Yeah, I do, some technical ones. Darren, you can leave now and be your usual 5 or 10 minutes late.
Yeah, no.
Go easy on me now that he's out of the room.
Yeah, okay. I was just looking at the, not looking, but had some questions that we want. First of all, breakdown of the jobs that are available on the site of career jobs and startup jobs. Do you have any idea?
You mean like a professional
Professional
job versus
working at the at a restaurant or whatever, first time startup jobs kind of thing?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. There is a graph on the website that talks about the number of professional jobs versus retail versus whatever industry.
Okay.
But I have been monitoring the jobs as they're coming on, and it is everything possible. Vera Health is advertising on there, or not advertising, but their jobs are being pulled onto there. Sanford, like I said, there was a CEO position listed on there. So if people are advertising their jobs here in Sioux Falls, it's a good chance that they're going to be on this site. So it's everything. It's a variety of everything.
If I may, thank you.
Yes, and Councilor Rolfing, I'm on the website right now, so.
Oh, okay.
79% of the jobs are full-time, and it breaks it down by professional, technical, food, and retail by percentage of the total
Good.
jobs. So
Good.
it is very analytical if you go on the site.
Haven't had a chance to go on there yet.
Okay.
Are we targeting any city specifically? In other words, are we gonna, I know we're going out to Rapid City, possibly Aberdeen or something like that with a billboard or that kind of thing. Are we gonna go other places with this? Like you said, Louisville.
Oh, is that how you said it?
That's how you say it, Louisville, and in Chicago and Minneapolis and that kind of thing?
We have not started advertising and promoting this website in any other cities at this point. What I can tell you, though, is that when we did announce this website, the AP picked up the story, and so it's hard to say what newspaper this ended up in. I was in the Black Hills over Easter at my mom and dad's reading the Rapid City Journal about the project that we just announced, so it's hard to say where all that news went. But we will look at that. Right now, our goal really was to think about, okay, who are the people who are already in our city for some reason? Are they here for business? Are they here to go pheasant hunting? Are they here to visit their grandma? And they realize, I love this city. This is really great. Oh, you mean there's a job for me here too? And so that's really the reason why we chose to focus here in Sioux Falls for the outside visitors that are already here and try to capitalize on that. And we'll see how that goes, and then we could branch out to those other areas over time.
Okay. I might have another comment later.
Okay, I'm going to ask other councilors if they have questions. Councilor Jameson?
Thanks, Heather, for being here.
Yep.
let's just go back to good basic government. Why was there no RFP, and why was this thing kind of hatched in private without any due diligence and research or consideration of all those other people out there? I mean, what was your thoughts for doing it the way you've done it?
Well, I don't know if I would use the word hatched. And I wasn't part of these conversations. Darren could speak more to contracts and how all those conversations worked when he met with the workforce development groups, but it was a consistent theme that came out of those meetings. It took a lot of time and effort, starting probably back in December, for Darren and I to work through this process. We did tease that out in the Mayor's State of the City address a week before this was announced. He did say that a workforce recruitment campaign was going to be announced. That was a week before we announced this, and of course the day before we announced this campaign, there was a media advisory that went out to all of you as well, saying that we were announcing this the next day. I don't feel like it was secretive. Of course, we know that there's always improvement that we can make when we communicate with the council, but that was never the intention of this project.
One more, Councilor.
Thank you, and perhaps I maybe don't understand all of your role, and don't let me put you somewhere where you're not. That's not my intention. I've just got questions. But are you familiar with the executive order regarding the city internet websites and social networking?
Yes.
You're very familiar with it? I mean, do you know that the content that you're providing on the SiouxFallsHasJobs.com would not be prohibited on the SiouxFalls.org site?
I'm sorry, I guess I don't understand your question.
Are you aware that the executive order prohibits the content that you have on SiouxFallsHasJobs.com from being posted on SiouxFalls.org?
And why is that?
No corporate or commercial logos or links to vendor sites in which the city has no financial interest or sponsorship shall be allowed on the city's official internet website. It's the same reason we don't have Jason Aldean or the Eagles. All those concerts that are great out at the event center, they're not posted on SiouxFalls.org either. But that would be great for our community. But there's certain lines and limits that you have to put on our website. And it's clearly laid out in the executive order, but I was just curious if you were aware of it.
I know of the executive order you're referring to. We do actually link to the Denny Samber Premier Center's site through SiouxFalls.org. So Sue Quambeck-Etten approved that the link,
okay.
And she is responsible for that executive order. She approved that link be put on SiouxFalls.org. So
Thank you.
See a problem.
Other questions? Councilor Anderson.
Heather, I think another question is the council is, or myself was questioning when it first came out, where did the funds actually come from to create this website? Out of what bucket, I guess?
Well, and of course, Darren he left me, but he could speak better to this. But it's my understanding that it all came out of the Economic Development Division's budget, and there is a line item in his budget for professional services.
And if I can reply to Councilman Jameson's on the executive order, I think that might have been what Darren was alluding to when he said more flexibility. And then there's also the security issue about attaching other websites that are outside of our own network. I would be very concerned about network security also for the city. So I guess, not trying to put an excuse up there, but just showing that there's probably some reasonable thinking on that, and we can discuss that later on too, I think.
Other questions? All righty. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
We are still in the open discussion, City Council open discussion. Other subjects or other input? Councilor Jameson.
2 items, if I could. The Governor's Office of Economic Development is putting together, through the Development Foundation in Sioux Falls, a presentation on the 29th, April 29th. It's a Wednesday. It's 7:30 or so in the morning. You'll receive invitations, but it's a review of the governor's new ad campaign, trying to recruit people to South Dakota. So that was done last week with the other economic development offices around the state, but they wanted to invite the city council and have our own presentation so that we could get up to speed on what they're doing and maybe what they're asking for. So you'll see an invitation from probably Slater Bar. Second one is last Wednesday, I had the presentation on the hands-free held device ban that they're proposing. Those people pulled me aside and tried to educate me. And I just wanted to throw it out that I'd sure support educating the public about the hazards of driving distracted. I came up with a little acronym called I'd rather educate before we confiscate. Kind of like, you know, if the glove fits, you must acquit. Anyway, I'm going to be in support of educating the public and maybe authorizing and spending some money to do that before we jump to a ban on all handheld electronic devices. But so I need to maybe think about a way to fund an item like that. But I just wanted to share that I had that meeting and I wanted you to know where I stand.
And just to be clear, because it is handheld devices while driving, not in Sioux Falls.
Oh, yeah, is that what I said?
Yeah. So we're not banning handheld devices in Sioux Falls. So, Councilor Erickson.
One quick thing I wanted to bring up, as we all know, the legislative session came to a close this year. I would just like to suggest maybe we do a legislative wrap-up with legislators like we've done in the past. I've been contacted by several legislators saying they appreciated the dialogue and the conversation between some of the city councilors and administration to just further the conversation about maybe some bills we wanted passed that didn't get passed that they can shed some light on and learn the politics of why things kind of shook down as the way they did. As we move forward, we'll also need to be talking about our legislative priorities for next year already as well. So I'd just like to throw it out there that this was, I think, extremely successful and created a lot of relationships. And so I would hope that we could work together to make that happen again here in the very, very near future.
And I would share that thought. And last year when I became chair, I kind of started our process early with the legislatives, and I'd encourage us to continue doing so. Councilor Anderson?
I think a good start also might be utilizing the presentation David Owen gave the legislators that attended the chamber meeting this morning. I decided to get up early and attend that also, and it was quite informational on the different bills, how they were passed, and exactly what happened with them from David's view. And I thought it was very informational. I did send it to David Bixler, so if you would like to see the presentation, it is available through him.
Okay. No other open discussion. We will move into our first presentation. I believe our city attorney, Dave Fifley, will be talking about, speaking of our legislative session, the municipal official decision-making in light of the South Dakota House Bill 1106 and Hanson versus Minnehaha County. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Karski. Dave Fifley with the City Attorney's Office. To segue from Councilor Erickson's comments regarding the legislative session, I'm here today to as you are all aware of this issue. However, you had asked me as a body to come and present to you regarding exactly what is going on with House Bill 1106, and in light of the Hanson versus Minnehaha County case, which was a South Dakota Supreme Court decision from October 29th of 2014. I'm just here to help educate the public on, I guess, what types of information you as elected officials can consider and what we're going on in terms of procedural rules and what House Bill 1106 will do going forward. First of all, the Hanson versus Minnehaha County decision. It involved an appeal from a conditional use permit that was granted by the Planning Commission of Minnehaha County. It was appealed to their county commission. Just prior to the public hearing on that, one of the county commissioners in doing an extensive amount of homework that he should be applauded for, went out and visited another similar facility to the one being permitted. And it was an agronomy facility. He went to that facility, asked a bunch of questions at that facility, so he was familiar with the operation and what types of federal safety regulations that facility operated under. And he also talked with opponents and proponents of that particular issue. At the public meeting itself, this county commissioner revealed near the end of the discussion that he had done this. And after the permit was granted by the county commission, the opponents to the permit appealed to circuit court and then ultimately went to South Dakota Supreme Court. And the crux of the ruling is that the elected official, since the county commission was acting in an adjudicatory fashion, they were hearing an appeal on a conditional use permit. Pardon my legalese, there's no other way to describe it. But since they were acting as a quasi-judicial body, essentially the elected official couldn't have what they call ex parte communications. Well, what does that mean? That means he can only hear testimony at the hearing itself. He couldn't go out and gather information like a site visit, and he couldn't go out and gather comments from people prior to the hearing. Now, the South Dakota Supreme Court fortunately only held that it disqualified that particular county commissioner's vote. There were enough other votes, so the decision stood. However, the second that came out, I subscribe to a listserv where we get notice right away whenever South Dakota Supreme Court decision comes down. I read it the afternoon it came out. I about fell out of my chair in terms of, I know you folks, I know what you do. You're very active. You like to gather information. You like to go out and talk with people. You get hundreds of emails, phone calls. You get stopped at the produce section at the grocery store. People want to talk to you. You're their elected officials. We understand that. The issue is, did Hanson versus Minnehaha County change the rules of how you could engage with the public? The answer is yes, it did. I was very concerned. At that point, we met with several local legislators, and I'll praise all of them. They quickly understood the issue and appreciated how this could affect local governing bodies going forward. And Roger Hunt and many others, I'll read off all the names, were very willing to sponsor the legislation. It was Representatives Hunt, Bartling, Schoenbeck, and Stevens, and Senators Teason, Bernie Hunhoff, and Rush all sponsored this legislation. And it made it through both branches of our South Dakota legislature with only one dissenting vote. And let me tell you what it does in particular, if I can do my technology here. I asked Jim in advance if he'd help me out, and I thank him for it. We're going to put up on the screen House Bill 1106. And I'll go through the sections very quickly so you understand. Briefly, what a quasi-judicial matter is, anytime you're granting a license or a permit or rendering an adjudicatory decision. As a practical matter, it means anytime you're issuing an alcohol license, which we do about 700 per year, and anytime you are making a decision on a conditional use permit or even a one-day permit for alcohol, those are quasi-judicial decisions, and we need to be careful. What the legislative fix, as I loosely call it, does is in Section 1, it recognizes that you as elected officials are going to receive and are able to consider any relevant information from any source. This means, like, some of you have some extensive background in various fields, in various prior jobs, or even this job. You can rely on that. That's the good news. The other good news is that this would say if you drive by a site on your way to work, your regular job, your other job, or you happen to drive home by a site, you can rely on that knowledge to make your decision. If there's a land use decision on a conditional use permit, say, for that site, you can rely on that. Where you need to be careful is note that this doesn't say You can receive information, but it's not saying that you can go out and gather information. And where we need to be careful as a city is we need to be careful on site visits, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The second section basically says that anytime you are doing any public meeting on an ordinance resolution, that it's legislative in nature. What's the importance of this? Well, you have lots of rezonings. You have lots of different ordinances or resolutions. People know about those. They'll want to approach you about them. It's a matter of public interest. This is saying in particular that you're able to informally do your meetings. You don't have to have the rules of evidence applying and formal procedures apply. Why would we put this section in? Well, as I was researching this across the country, I was seeing cities that would actually have an attorney sitting there acting as a judge for their elected body, making evidentiary rulings, and they had all these very specific procedures, and they were issuing dozens of pages worth of reports on every single decision. You folks have 2,500 items on your agenda every year, approximately. We simply don't have the time to render the formal rules in order, especially on a legislative matter. So what Section 2 does, it just keeps it informal, essentially the way it is now. The last sentence talks about, obviously we're not going to abrogate any open meeting requirements. Section 3, if you could, thanks, Jim. This is where it gets to the crux of it. As far as a quasi-judicial matter, again, when you're deciding a license or a permit issue, again, it's informal. But if you are relying on any evidence, essentially any information that's not stated at the meeting, and here's where you're going to also need to maybe change a little bit of how we operate, is you'll need to disclose that during the meeting so that anyone attending that meeting has a chance to respond. So let's use the, I drove by that site on my way to another meeting 3 weeks ago, and I noticed this. Tell me about that, about this. Tell me about that. You need to actually state that on the record at the meeting and give everyone a chance to reply. And looking at all the cases across the country, that was almost universal, that they thought that was part of ensuring due process. Then Section 4, briefly, is just putting into state statute kind of what we know happens. Citizens are concerned about items. They want to redress or petition their grievances to their elected officials. In particular, this basically says if you are approached at the produce counter by a citizen about a matter that's going to come up that happens to be a quasi-judicial matter, it doesn't disqualify you. So, Councilor Erickson, if you're approached at a game, at one of your kids' games, and they say, Councilor Erickson, I want to talk to you briefly about this, you can listen and be a responsible elected official without saying, uh-oh, that come up on the agenda 5 months from now, I got to recuse myself. No, you wouldn't have to anymore. So this also sets the bar at a clear and convincing evidence standard to disqualify someone from that type of a proceeding. So again, it's a recognition overall that this is the way things work, this is how it operates. Going forward, what does this all mean? This bill will take effect, it was signed by the governor, so it'll take effect on July 1 of this year. As you'll know, we put this winter an item in the box on our regular council meeting agenda that basically says, and I got this directly from the Public Utilities Commission, so I didn't invent the wheel here. As your elected representatives, the City Council values your input and feedback. However, the South Dakota Supreme Court has ruled that city councilors may not engage in private communications, those are those ex parte communications, with persons when the City Council will act as a decision maker on an upcoming matter involving a license or permit. I didn't put quasi-judicial in there because who's going to know what that really means? In those instances, persons are encouraged to provide written comments to the entire City Council or to provide oral comment at the public meeting on that matter when it is considered by the entire City Council. Those who provide comments should understand that their comments will become part of the official record and subject to review by all parties in the public. So what the Public Utilities Commission does, and I used to practice in front of them quite a bit, if you get a comment as one commissioner, and they're elected officials, as you know, they will then say, please address the entire commission on that, and they place it on the electronic record that anyone can go and see. For the next 2 months, until this bill becomes law, we've talked about that with 1 or 2 of the conditional use permits that you have had, and we'll continue to operate under that. And people just need to understand that these are rules that you didn't make, but they're rules that we as a city have to operate under. Come July 1, you'll be able to have those kind of communications freely and be able to be elected officials in what a reasonable person would think an elected official could listen to their issue. The other items are, again, no site visits on your own regarding a license or a permit. That's not going to change. What we will need to do, and I've conferred with Minnehaha County as well, since you do have joint meetings with them. If you need a site visit, we will need to notice that and have everyone aware of that, so that if a site visit is done, everyone who's interested in that item will know that City Council, County Commission will be at the site Thursday at 10 a.m. Voila, everybody knows about it. It's just an added hurdle to ensure due process, but it's certainly manageable, and we as staff, we've talked about it several times, we'll make it happen if you ever want a site visit. The other issue is certainly, we've talked about it, unfortunately, you have so few of these come up in terms of licenses or permits other than the alcohol items and the conditional use permits, but we'll need to be careful until July 1 as far as communicating with anyone outside of a public meeting, and we'll alert you the next 2 months if there are items that are clearly quasi-judicial. The other issue that we'll want to be careful of both now and forever going forward is if you do any kind of, it's so typical in our electronic world where we want to do something on the internet, get a little background information so we maybe even know the terminology of the industry. Say if on that agronomy plant for the Hansen case, if someone would have searched on the internet, well, what types of chemicals does an agronomy plant process? What's going on? It's okay if you do that, but if you do that, you'll need to put it on the record. So, in conclusion, I think these are rules that we as staff will help you go through. The House Bill 1106, I think, took care of most of the issues, but I think the real takeaway is we need to do scheduled site visits. You can still rely on any personal knowledge you may have. You'll be able to have all the communications you want with your constituents. And then if you're relying on something that isn't brought up at the meeting, you'll just need to disclose it in time at the meeting so people will understand that you might be relying on that information and have a chance to respond. So take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Fifley. Questions for our city attorney, Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, just to clarify, David, after July 1st, we can continue to operate like we used to as city council members, getting out there and talking to people without having to worry, can I talk to this person or can I not talk to this person, except for the area of site visit?
Correct.
And anything else?
No, that's it, Counselor.
Okay.
Councilor Urbanbach.
So clarify then, site visit, because a lot of times I'll do a drive-by on a zoning change, right? And Counselor Anderson's grinning at me. We're driving around all the time. So on a zoning change, that's not it.
That's
We're talking
not a
about
quasi-judicial. No, that's a legislative act. Sorry to interrupt.
Conditional use permit type things, anything that has to do with sort of a permit situation.
So if there's like an alcohol permit that may involve something involving the site, you'll want to do a site visit announced at that one too.
Wow, this is tough. This is really hard. I guess the thing I need to say, and we need to say, is thank you for working with the legislature to make this change, because it was kind of shocking to know. I know all of these guys are out doing stuff, talking to people all the time. this really ties our hands as public servants. So I appreciate your work on this.
Oh, yes, and thanks to all those legislators, well, almost the entire body in unison recognize how important your role as local representatives are. And it's important to note, too, that South Dakota, by per capita, has the highest percentage of elected officials of any state in the country. So this, in particular, affects us probably more than any other state. We do want to certainly comply with due process, but yes, as you said, Councilor Erpenbach, people need to understand due process sometimes is a lot more work. So again, it'll be a learning process as we go forward, and your entire staff, we remain able, willing, and able to help you however we can going forward.
All righty. Seeing no other questions, or Councilor Jameson?
Dave, just to make sure if we do make a mistake and something happens, you'll bail us out of jail.
Absolutely. I used to be a public defender, Counselor. Happy to do that.
Sometimes. All righty. Thank you very much. Our presentation, and I want to thank these people for their patience and listening to the inner workings of our city government. But Elizabeth Whaley is the president and CEO of our Great Plains Zoo, and I know you have some guests that we'll hear from also. But welcome, Elizabeth, to talk to us about our national perspective on zoos.
Thank you, Chairman Karski, and good afternoon, City Council members. I'm very pleased to be here. As you know, your Great Plains Zoo is accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, putting us in the top 10% of animal institutions in the country. And today we have a very special honor by having Jim Maddie, the president and CEO of the National Association of Zoos and Aquariums, with us today. And in just a moment, he'll provide you with a national perspective on zoos nationwide, as well as maybe a little insight to your own Great Plains Zoo. Jim is a nationally recognized leader in conservation policy and advocacy. Since joining the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, in 2006, he has implemented an aggressive and successful plan to improve association member services. And under his leadership, the AZA has developed a number of new partnerships and absolutely has become a leader in the movement of species survival planning. Jim previously served as president of the National Park Foundation for 9 years, and there he worked to strengthen the connection between the American people and their national parks by raising private funds, making strategic grants, and increasing public awareness. Prior to that, Jim served as president of the League of Conservation Voters through 4 federal election cycles. And prior to that, Jim broke ground as the first executive director of the Western Governors Association. And there, Jim developed policies and programs in the areas of natural resources, the environment, human services, economic development, international relations, and state governance. You can see why we are very excited to have with us here in Sioux Falls the president and CEO of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, Jim Maddie.
Thank you so much. You stay with me?
Welcome, Mr. Maddie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Councilors, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and I enjoyed that last hour. Those, I've had the privilege of appearing before a number of councils, and frankly, not to blow smoke on you here, but this is the best level of government. I've worked in state government. I've testified before innumerable congressional committees. This is where you're accountable. Everybody knows who you are, and they don't hesitate for a moment to let you know how they feel about your the wisdom of your decisions. So I admire your public service, and I applaud the way you allow for such good public participation in your proceedings. So I'll not sure exactly how long your patience will last on this. I'll try to watch your eyes carefully, and if I see that sign, I'll either go faster or I'll skip some of this presentation. I want to start by saying that we're the accrediting body. We set the national standards for modern zoological practice. Because we do this for the United States and Canada, that puts us in a leadership position globally. And so AZA's standards, the standards that the Great Plains Zoo meets every day with every animal in your collection, those are not only the top national standards, that's the international standard for animal care as well. The European zoos and aquariums, the zoos and aquariums in other parts of the world typically adopt our standards, sometimes as quickly as we've revised them, and other times waiting to see how that develops. Part of my message to you is that the Great Plains Zoo is one important link in a national, international, and global wildlife conservation program. You have endangered species in this zoo that are part of very carefully designed, scientifically driven survival plans, breeding plans, if you will. And there are already 3 or 4 dozen species that would be extinct on Earth but for the work of these species survival plans. And as Elizabeth alluded to a moment ago, in just a few weeks we're going to announce that we're going to go beyond the first 3 or 4 dozen successful efforts to prevent species extinction, and we're going to commit ourselves as a group, including the Great Plains Zoo, to a national effort to save an additional 100 species. Some people would say, why zoos? Why this association of zoos and aquariums? The answer is we're the only ones who've ever done it. We've done it several dozen times, and the rate of extinction is such that we clearly need to increase that pace. The Great Plains Zoo, as you can see on the screens, more than 1,000 animals, key player in breeding 23 endangered species. That means these are species survival plans in which the animals of that species that you hold here are linked through, again, a national and international database. They're analyzed in my office by a group of conservation biologists, half dozen PhDs and others, and then they make recommendations. This is not compulsory, this is cooperative and voluntary, but they'll make recommendations to Elizabeth and her staff on moving animals, maybe move a male to another place for breeding, maybe receive a female from another institution to breed with a male that you have. Sometimes they'll make a recommendation that because of space or particular expertise in your zoo here, that you receive the male and the female from 2 other places and see if you can't successfully help those animals propagate, produce offspring, and help assure not only the continuation of that species, but preserving natural levels of genetic diversity in those species. AZA accredited zoos will see about 180 million guests this year. That means that's pretty big. That means you see those logos for the professional sports up there. We sell more tickets than all of those professional sports leagues together. Zoos and aquariums are the single most popular public attraction in this country. That's been the case for decades, and of course part of my job is to assure that we conduct ourselves in such a way that we remain, that we maintain that standing. It's a $21 billion industry. If you look at all the direct and indirect economic impacts, we directly employ 50,000 people. We're a major employer in your community through the Great Plains Zoo, and when you add that all up, it is quite an economic impact. I see, well, that's the local number. That's nearly $2 million in salaries, 40 full-time jobs, and 45 seasonal jobs. And those seasonal jobs often employ young people, employ college students and others, and set them on a career involved in natural resource management, wildlife conservation, and the like. Let's, should we go on from there? One of the things our association does on a regular basis is to try to stay on top of public opinion. When you're the most popular public attraction in the country, it's really, really important to understand why that is, why that might change within certain demographic groups, or what it might be. But 80+%, about 83% of folks say that they've either been to the zoo this year or plan to go to the zoo in the next year or two. And very importantly, on the economic impact side, employers report to our research teams that they like to expand, and they like to locate, and they like to increase investment in communities that have these kinds of public facilities, because they know that their employees and their employees' families prefer those communities. So it's definitely an asset. It's an immediate asset for job creation. Your zoo is certainly an engine in the regional economy and the regional tourism economy, but it's also a magnet, a really attractive feature for any number of prospective employers in the community. You've been here in part because of the strength of the municipal support and that public-private partnership in the zoo. You've doubled your attendance in recent years. Your memberships have tripled, and it's an impressive rate of growth. This is a growing industry. It's a dynamic industry, but the growth that you've shown in your attendance, in your memberships, in your revenue, and your overall impact certainly well exceeds the national average, and I congratulate you for that as well. I already touched on that one, I think. As you can tell, I'm getting some of these things out of order, but just incredibly popular, continues to be popular. We have a little bit of an issue with the millennial generation. They haven't had, most of them have not married, had their children yet. That's when people come back and reattach to the zoo typically, so we have to keep a close eye on that. But again, it's extraordinarily popular institutions. I might also point out, and I'll touch on those points in just a minute, that North and South Dakota and Kansas, we just heard that you have more public officials, more elected officials per capita. Those three states, you, South Dakota, or you, North Dakota, and Kansas, have more zoos in smaller communities than the rest of the country does. Now, you have a lot of small communities, but that connection to wildlife, that connection to wildlife conservation, to natural resource conservation, sometimes I think it just comes more naturally to folks who have that more immediate and direct connect to production, agriculture, to farm life, to rural and small town life. It's just a little more obvious, I think, sometimes why that's important than it is to folks who have an exclusively urban orientation, if you will. Everyone who comes to the Great Plains Zoo, about 300,000 people this year, I think, every one of them is entitled to a meaningful wildlife education experience. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone coming to the zoo is looking for an educational experience. Usually they're looking for a nice time, enjoy the weather, get some fresh air, look at the animals, entertain your family, be with a church group or a school group that you enjoy being a part of. But whenever a guest, whenever a visitor to your zoo is looking for that meaningful educational experience, wants to learn more about the animal, more about the animal's habitat, wants to understand their conservation status in the wild, wants to understand the scientific work and the research that goes on about that species in these zoos, then as a result of our accreditation standards, you're required to be able to provide that, and you do. And I see it in the budget, I see it in the zoo in terms of the facilities and the staff in this zoo, and then it certainly shows up in your summary statistics. The number of school children, the number of teachers, the number of groups coming in an organized educational program are really outstanding across the board at the Great Plains Zoo. Probably the most surprising thing to me, I came into town yesterday, I went straight to the zoo, I spent some time with Elizabeth and Dan and the staff. You know, my records show that this zoo's been here a while, that it's been accredited for a while. It looks like a brand-new zoo. And I often tell people the best zoos are like hospitals and airports. They're always under construction. You know, you never quite finish. And because of changes in popular opinion, because of cultural changes, because of increased educational levels and other factors, zoos have to be constantly renewing. And I think with the master plan that you've developed, the master plan that the staff and the society and others are following, I think you're definitely on track. You're keeping pace with ever increasing national standards for animal care and welfare. This is a little bragging about your own zoo and what you know better than I do, but all of these new exhibits, particularly that the new petting zoo, the new touch opportunity for the petting zoo, and the children's experience is especially impressive. And the rhino exhibit, I think, is the best in the country. I mean, this is we have zoos with budgets of $200 million a year, and those zoos do not have a rhinoceros exhibit that's in any way any better than yours. It's got the right sight lines. Most importantly, it's got the right sort of health and welfare considerations for the animal. So you can see the animal, you can learn about the animal, you can provide great care for that animal without in any way interfering with that animal's natural behavior. And that's the ultimate goal of modern zoological practice. This is an animal that you now have in your zoo. That's a brand new exhibit. I think you developed that exhibit as part of modernizing, bringing up to date your entrance area and your ticketing area and all of that. This animal's only kept, we have 228 accredited zoos and aquariums in the U.S. and Canada. You're one of a dozen who are keeping this animal, a little more than a dozen, maybe 18, something like that. But it's extraordinarily important. That's a fascinating animal. The public loves to see it. It'll it'll increase your attendance and your attractiveness. But most importantly to me, as one of fewer than 20 of my members that are keeping that animal, you're an absolutely critical link in maintaining genetic diversity, maintaining a robust population in human care, and being able, therefore, to reintroduce these animals in the wild when the opportunity presents itself. We don't have a whole lot of influence over the management of protected areas in Japan, but when they do make improvements and expand those things, you may well be where the stock comes from for that kind of effort. The kids' clinic is, I think that may be the cleverest thing I've seen anyone do in the children's education space in a long, long time. I think I'm hearing stories that families are scheduling visits to the zoo. I was just here last week. I saw all the animals. We came back because the children wanted to have that experience, of the kids' clinic. So those creative approaches to education are extraordinarily important. The National Academy of Sciences, National Science Foundation, and our organization jointly have conducted research on where people learn science, where they learn biology, where they learn wildlife science, if you will. And the answer is not in school, not in college. They actually learn more in these informal educational settings about those topics than they do in their formal educational experience. I think I can keep going. Everybody looks okay. You got a few more minutes? There's a favorite. There's a red panda. I mentioned earlier that your zoo follows a comprehensive development plan. That is also a requirement of accreditation. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have the financial strength you have the depth of staffing, and you have access to capital such that you can build new exhibits, you can maintain, you can grow the facilities in pace with your attendance and the rest of that. And of course, the demonstration of access to capital comes right back to the zoo's relationship with the council, with the city administration, and a great public-private partnership that I referenced earlier. That's a terrific animal. That is, you know, if I went to the zoo and I said, you know, is there one area here where you're falling behind just a little bit, not quite keeping up with the preferred look and feel of a large carnivore exhibit, it might be brown bear. But before I had a chance to say that, Elizabeth and others at the zoo told me that is in your comprehensive plan, that's scheduled for improvement, and nothing I like better than being told that before I offer a little criticism or a little recommendation. To hear that I don't even need to say those things is the music to my ears. You don't have a lion now. Lions are just getting rarer and rarer in their natural habitat. Our member organizations, including support from the Great Plains Zoo, we spend about $150 million a year out in the field trying to protect elephant and rhino and lion and tiger and other species that are being poached, species that are being killed because of their tusks, because of their horns, because of a demand for a traditional Asian medicine or whatever the case might be. But and we're proud of that. We spend that money very carefully. But these animals are getting more and more rare. The time is approaching when they'll only be available for viewing in zoological institutions. And I'm sad to say that, but I'm very, very pleased to see that you're increasing your commitment there. You're a great zoo, you're a tremendous community asset. You should have lions, and I'm sure the public's going to respond very, very positively when you accomplish that. This, Elizabeth, if you want to take folks through the visitor service model, I would invite you to do that.
I'd be glad to, and you all know this in spades. You all are business people, and of course, every one of those 228 zoos sort of lives by this. But I think it's good for us to talk about it out loud a little bit. You know, of course, it starts with driving more visitors through the gate. And we're very pleased and honored to say that we now have double the attendance we had just 9 years ago. So people are checking out the zoo, and that, of course, is how our zoo grows, through that support of the community. But when they get there, we need to make sure that they have an enhanced visitor experience. We need to make sure that we have more exhibits and attractions for them to enjoy. Of course, people need to know about what's going on at the zoo, so increased awareness is a big part of Kylie's job. She does a great job of it. You're hearing a lot about the zoo, and that's why people are reminded to come to the zoo. And when they get there, they need to have better programs. A great example of that is that every one of our educational programs meets or exceeds national standards for science education. So a teacher knows that when a Zoomobile comes to his or her classroom, their kids are going to do better on those tests because we've covered some core subjects. So when we do all that, we fulfill our mission as a zoo better. And when we fulfill our mission better, we're more relevant to the community, memberships go up, we're more attractive to corporate sponsors, and people spend more money while they're at the zoo, which helps us run a better zoo. It gives us more to work with. And we are very committed to maintaining that upward spiral of success through doing all of those things. But of course, it all starts by bringing them through the gate.
Thank you. And let me just wrap up by saying our accreditation program operates on a 5-year cycle. No matter, you can have a perfect inspection, a perfect evaluation process, pass with flying colors, no outstanding concerns. And 5 years later, you have to go through it all again. And that is because these are science-driven standards. Science is a dynamic process. It's constantly evolving. You know, every year we discover something we thought we knew we had wrong. Every year we discover things that we'd been trying to figure out for a long, long time, and finally have put the pieces together. Next year is your 5th year. So I will be sending a team of probably a zoo director, a curator of collections, and a veterinarian. They'll be selected from around the country, and they'll all be excited about coming to Sioux Falls. And when they get here, believe me, you've never seen anything as thorough as this. They physically go through everything. They open drawers. They look in closets. They interview every member of the staff. They'll interview many of you if you'll allow it. They'll look at the books. They look at the finances. They look at the payroll. They look at the benefit program. They look at your turnover. They'll look at every vial of medication in your clinic, trying to make sure that you have the licenses that correspond with those items, that you don't have anything out of date. I mean, it is incredibly thorough. And then Elizabeth and her top staff will be asked, essentially required, to then come to a national conference and go through, this will sound familiar, a quasi-judicial proceeding in which a panel of 13 of your peers will question you. Well, you know, the inspector saw this, but you didn't think it was a problem. Why not? You know, an inspector saw this. Have you corrected it? You know, the team had a recommendation. Have you followed the recommendation? It's a really, really thorough process, and I'm not concerned. I'm not worried in this particular case, but I can tell you that in the 9 years that I've been doing this, we've denied accreditation 100 times. And we only have 228 members. So it's tough. And you have to improve in that 5-year period. If things are just every bit as good as they were 5 years ago, you've probably got a problem. It has to be better than it was 5 years ago. You have a very progressive zoo. You've got a talented staff. It's an important collection. Driving up attendance the way you have shows me that the community has very, very strong support. And again, when I look at the operating budget, and I look at the capital budget, and I see the way that this body has dealt with the Great Plains Zoo, I thank you for that. I admire what you've done to fulfill your responsibilities in that area. We are always here to help. I probably should have said I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm here to help. You may have heard that before. But in this case, it really, really is true. The last thing I'd say is we're a nonprofit organization. Our business model is voluntary and cooperative, and I think you get good value from your zoo, and I think your zoo gets good value from its participation in the association. We're always open to any and all of you. If you're in Washington for legislative conferences or NCSL or Council of Mayors or any of those kinds of activities, let us know, or let Elizabeth know you're going to be doing that, and we'd like to give you a close-up look at the way we operate in that group of scientists that I talked about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Matty. Our community is proud of our zoo. It is a gem, a jewel in our city, and our board and our administration there, they do a great job of communicating with the public and the council, and there isn't a negative person about our zoo in this community from what I've experienced. So we appreciate your attention, and we're looking forward to, I'm sure, that accreditation process all over again. But I imagine some of the counselors may have questions.
If you pass that accreditation, I'll be back. If you don't, I'll be back later.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I just wanted to say thank you. We appreciate you being here. We are, as Councilor Karski said, proud of our zoo. I did have one little question for Elizabeth, if I could. Elizabeth, it's been several years since the Zoomobile visited the City Council, and I wondered if it might make another visit.
I was just waiting for an invitation. I think
Would
that
you
is
please?
it.
It is. We can work with our staff and bring come to a 4 o'clock meeting. That was a total blast the last time we did that.
We would love to do that. And I know you have some close personal friends at the zoo that have some news. I know you and your mother both have been up close and personal with our rhinoceros pair. And Jim, would you like to tell them what you saw yesterday at the rhino exhibit?
It was, I walked up to the rhinoceros exhibit, and there was a male and a female, and they were literally that curved, pointed horn. They were tip to tip, and I misunderstood. I turned to Elizabeth and I said, "How long have these animals been together?" And she said, I thought she said about an hour. And I thought, oh, this is fascinating. Well, of course, it turns out those animals have been in that exhibit for some time, and they've successfully reproduced. But what Elizabeth meant was this was the first time they'd seen each other that morning. And it was stomping and snorting and clashing and clicking those horns together. And, the male they were face to face. The male preferred to change positions, and the female wasn't ready to change positions, and she was absolutely in control of that whole transaction. It was
right.
It was a fun morning at the zoo.
Counselor, no comments over there?
Thank you.
Counselor Anderson?
Elizabeth? Since we're on the rhinos, what are the species of rhino that we have here at the zoo?
We have eastern black rhinoceros. There are only about 3,500 of those left in the wild. And we have two, as Jim said, a successful breeding pair. They've had 2 calves, but this was actually the first couple of hours that they had been together in over a year. So they don't stick around together unless they're in a breeding window, and we're very excited that they are. Because it's important to make more eastern black rhinos, and these 2 are 2 of only about 65 in North American zoos to help propagate that species. So they're important to us because we love them, but they're also really important to the overall population of eastern black rhinos.
And if I'm right, did we just, I thought I read a news article talking about a black rhino species actually going extinct?
Well, you may be thinking of the northern white rhino, and there's only one of those left in sort of since we're saying quasi a lot, the quasi-wild, and that is in a reserve in Kenya. And so it's in a very large reserve, but it's enclosed and it's under guard. And so that's kind of one of those stories where we say we didn't win the battle. There's only that one left.
There's also there's a smaller rhinoceros species, the Sumatran rhino, and that is so close to extinct in the wild, and we've lost through old age the last of that species that we had in a North American zoo. The numbers are too small to do any importation, and so we're working with the governments in the region to protect that last remaining population and try to rebuild it.
Thank you. And that's a point I was trying to make is that, we're talking 23 endangered species that we're in breeding programs with. It's amazing a zoo our size is doing the work that we're doing. And I want to really compliment you and your staff. We've had discussions since you were brought on board, Elizabeth, and all I've seen is nothing but great growth out there. And almost every time I drive by when it's open, there's, a full parking lot. So thank you for all your work.
Maybe we need a bigger parking lot. Maybe the agenda for next week, perhaps.
All righty, thank you again very much. We are scheduled to have Jim David talk about our procedure for joint elected official meetings. We don't have any joint meetings coming up, and I'm going to postpone that because we do have a rather full agenda for our land use committee. So that committee meeting will begin at 5:45. I am going to adjourn our city council informational meeting.